All right, well, to fashion now, where a new experiment in shoppable runways seems to be paying off. Designers have started making their collections available for sale straight after they appear on the runway.
So, fashionistas can get their hands on the latest styles before they're copied by chain stores. It has been a huge success, and to tell us more, we're joined by fashionista, writer, Paddy Huntington.
Good morning.
So what's the story then? There's obviously concern among designers that they put something out there and lo and behold it pops up from some dressmaker or fashion designer elsewhere and think, hang on, that's mine.
Or some, one of the world's largest clothing makers like sort of Inditex, which runs Zara and has thousands of stores around the world and can get products into store in a couple of weeks.
Yep.
Not such a big surprise, because, fast fashion, this revolution has been brewing for a very long time. We've always had middle market chain stores, like in Australia we've got Witcher and Country Road and stuff, but Zara and H&M and Uniqlo and Topshop in London really, they really sped up the supply sort of process and got the stuff in there in record time. And of course, if it's on the runway, it's in the public domain, they're going to use those ideas. So yes, people have kind of talked the talk, and this season a handful of designers actually walked the walk, literally.
Yeah.
And it's been really interesting. And they made, some of them, Ralph Lauren actually made a surprise at the last minute. He showed his winter collection in February, but made another collection. And showed it actually shut down Madison Avenue to erect a tent outside his show, and that was immediately available. Tom Ford, who was the most famous designer in the world in the 1990s at Gucci, and of course has gone on to create I think it's a $1 billion empire. 4 days after he premiered his new film, Nocturnal Creatures, at the Venice Film Festival, did a mini sort of Golden Globes extravaganza with a shoppable runway. Burberry in London has done it. Tommy Hilfiger created a whole carnival called the Tommy Pier, and that was available. I must say, in Australia though, I looked and the clothes weren't available for 3 days, which I thought was a
There's
bit of...
always the lag with
but we're a bit
Australia,
slow
isn't
for
there?
Mark, aren't we?
Yeah, but people will exploit that. There are local people who could get stuff. If they really wanted to, if they saw something that they thought was going to sell, I suppose they could in 3 days. I don't know, but if make it available, it should be available everywhere.
So are we seeing as well? You mentioned that we've got the winter shows in February, but now we're seeing them again at this time of year.
Well, no, the people who showed their winter stuff that was shoppable didn't show it. Burberry didn't show.
Right.
Burberry didn't show.
So we're swapping things around a little bit now.
Exactly. So the rest of the season
Hang on, I'm confused.
It's very confusing. You're not the only one. The whole fashion industry is confused. This is the time of the year when they normally show their spring-summer 2017, the next year collections, which are available. Everyone goes, supposed to go, ooh, ow, wow, and then they have it ordered, delivered, in store in 6 months' time. Look, I'd say probably 90% of the industry is still doing that, but there's this core now that have actually, and the results have been quite impressive. They have had double to triple digit sales increases. It's obviously early days, and it remains to be seen whether the sales will continue across the season, and without, the big show extravaganza and all the social media buzz, when all that's died down, whether it will continue through the season.
So it's fair to say there are still seasons then in fashion.
Well,
but clearly, though, it's going to be dominated by the Northern Hemisphere.
Well, that's a good question because, for example, Burberry and they're calling it their September collection, not their spring, summer, or autumn, winter. Yeah. And of course, it's a global industry. People are travelling. So it is really kind of crazy, chaotic, interesting times. And we'll see what happens, I guess, in the next 6 months.
Well, speaking of crazy, chaotic, perhaps controversial as well, the Marc Jacobs show has drawn a little bit of fire for the way that the models were wearing their hair, dreadlocks.
Got nothing to do with the fashion. Well, fashion in a sense, but not what they're selling.
Exactly. Everyone else was talking about see now, buy now, and everyone was talking about Marc Jacobs. Dreadlocks, or Dreadgate, as I called it. Look, this has been an issue for some. Justin Bieber also got into trouble recently for having, blonde dreadlocks. Whether white people have the right to wear dreadlocks. Of course, many of them have. Hello, Boy George, Hazy Fantasy, Lana Wachowski, one of the directors of The Matrix. She's actually in Marc Jacobs' current advertising campaign. And, look, it was a mixed cast. I'd say about 30%, 25 to 30% were either black, mixed race or Asian girls, but the rest of them were white, and they were big name sort of supermodels like Gigi Hadid and Kendall Jenner. And immediate negative reaction from people. But how dare you, take sort of, something that's cultural appropriation. And Marc Jacobs fired back and saying, well, how dare you say that, it's ridiculous, it's just a sort of fashion thing. And then he got criticised for that. And he also mentioned, well, why don't you, every black woman who straightens her hair, why don't you criticise
so
that?
it goes. It's pretty ridiculous, isn't it?
It
I
is.
would have thought there's a much greater issue with occupational health and safety
With
those models walking down the catwalk in platforms that are they've got to be at least 6 inches, 10 plus
they were
12
about
centimetres?
Try 15. Really extraordinary. Marc Jacobs used the same kind of shoes in black for the last season, and I think I mentioned in one of our discussions, is that going to show on sort of the street level? I don't think it has, but it
hasn't caught on. What a surprise.
It's certainly a talking point, and it just looked like, the shoes that that Elton John wore and Tommy. Tommy,
Yeah.
Elton John, eat your heart out. I know. But look, they looked incredible. They looked like these just huge creatures the dreadlocks added another foot. So, well, look, no one fell over, but models fell over in other shows.
Ah, indeed. It is, as you mentioned, an occupational hazard, I think, isn't it?
It is a big issue. And look, there were a couple of years ago when shoes became more and more outrageous on the runway, and the last one was actually Alexander McQueen's, these crazy things called the armadillo boots. Yeah, this is Kanye West's Yeezy show, and look, he was slammed. This was kind of the first day of New York Fashion Week, and apart from the fact that the media claimed they were hijacked in buses, didn't know where they were going, and it took 4.5 hours, there were like 100 extras who were standing in the sun, and some of them allegedly fainted. Models couldn't walk in the shoes. Now, they're not crazy shoes, they're just kind of obviously ill-fitting shoes. And at one point, I'm not sure if it's on this video, but one of the audience members actually helped a model down the runway because she just couldn't walk. He's been accused of, obviously, not human rights abuse, but, cruelty. And look, these people wanted to be in the show. I'm not sure if you can see the extras who are standing there, and that are standing sort of as sentinels.
Yeah.
In the afternoon, New York in September can be unbearably hot, and people said it was just inconsiderate. While all the Kardashians and his celebrity fans were ushered in at the last minute and seated in the shade. So, big controversy.
I guess it is a show. It's entertainment, isn't it?
Well, it is, but it's like, how do you treat your workers? Did they have enough water? People they couldn't stand any longer. So people suffer for fashion, I suppose.
It has been a rather interesting few weeks, hasn't it?
It has. There's always, and look, there's been a very big Australian contingent. There's always Australians on the runway in New York and Paris and in showrooms. But I've counted about 50 between the runways and showrooms. There's been some big showrooms in both cities. I think that's probably unprecedented and doing really well. Zimmerman, in terms of trends, some of the trends that we've seen. There's a Victoriana trend where they're talking about making a remake of Picnic at Hanging Rock. So
right.
Is that like big dresses then?
Sorry?
Big dresses.
Yeah, but these white sort of lacy Victorian sort of collars and features, and that was a really large trend.
But isn't that totally inappropriate for the Australian climate?
What, high necks? Not
I don't
really.
know,
It's
maybe
sun-safe.
sun protection factor there could
It's
be.
sun-safe. Yeah.
No, okay.
Yeah, but it's light fabrics and it's lots of broderie on glaze.
No, I
and
just thought it
cotton.
might be a little hot.
Yeah,
Well,
no, go for cotton rather than wool, perhaps.
Well, in the Middle East they wear sort of
Yeah,
kaftans
fair enough.
and so that was one of the biggest trends.
Yeah.
And Zimmerman's sort of been they're really sort of coming to the fore sort of every season. They're sort of getting bigger and bigger. Some of the other trends we've seen, we haven't been able to avoid athleisure, which I know is your favourite subject.
Yes.
I think we do that every time, don't we?
It's not going away, Andrew.
But in terms of the historical references, we've also seen in the British show some really interesting historical costume. And we're talking, this is athleisure here, that's from Yeezy, the Yeezy show, and sport. But in terms of historical costume references, we saw ruffs at Burberry. Now that's Elizabethan. At J.W. Anderson, we saw coats that looked like something that Henry VIII, the Tudor period. And then another Erdem's collection was inspired by the lady-in-waiting, I think, to Charles I's wife. So interesting that we're sort of seeing, here's some of this Victoriana and the ruffles and the white, and it was kind of everywhere.
Incredibly retro, Patty Huntington. Thank you very much for taking us through all the froth and frills of fashion.
My pleasure.
Thank you.